Who do you think makes the better match ball? Nike, also known as Nike, or Adidas, also known as Adidas? I said it that way so nobody gets mad at me. What I have here on the table in front of me are the two latest match balls from the two biggest brands. From Nike, the third Premier League ball of the season, the Nike Merlin, which is the same physical ball as they've been using all season long, but obviously with new colors and graphics. And then from Adi, we have the Champions League Finale Istanbul ball, which is the ball they'll be using for, of course, the final, as well as the knockout stages of the Champions League. And as I'm sure most of you guys watching this video already know, official match balls are extremely expensive. Retail on the Merlin is $160 and retail on the Champions League ball is $165. And I'm sure there is that person down below in the comments already letting us know that this is way too much money to spend on a ball. Anyone who pays this much is totally dumb and you should just never buy them in general. Obviously, if that's your opinion, this video is not for you. But if you are somebody that is curious about what the differences are, and if I do think that one is better than the other, then that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this video. We're going to talk build quality, we're going to talk technology, and we're going to talk about general performance characteristics and what separates these two match balls used in some of the biggest leagues and tournaments in professional football. So if you want to learn more about these, please stick around and watch the entire video. And if you are interested in either of these for yourself, including the takedown variations, I'll leave a little pop-up on screen, or you can click the links down below in the description. That's going to take you to the review pages on my website, where you'll find buy it now links with exclusive SR4U coupon codes to pick up these balls or variations of these balls below their normal retail prices. Now, before we get too technical, I want to talk about design, because these are both new balls that have a pretty interesting look to them. We'll start with the new Merlin, which, as you can see, is a white-based ball with these large orange circles. Now, historically, the ball to finish the Premier League season has always been a bright yellow high-vis variation, which we did already get this year, but it looks like for the end of the season, as winter is coming to an end, they're going to transition back to white, but still have a super bright high-vis element in this bright orange circle. Of course, some of the panels have been blacked out, and you'll notice very distinctly you have the Premier League trophy here in white in some of the black panels, which I think is actually a nice touch. If you look even closer, you can see within this little outline here in kind of like a chrome blue, it just says best of the best of the best of the best of the best. And it just keeps repeating itself, has this kind of weird zigzag design running through the ball, which I think looks quite good as well. Obviously the Premier League branding and Premier League logo, the ACC logo, which of course is extremely important. You do have the FIFA approved badge right there for those that are wondering, and as a whole, it's actually a pretty clean looking design, and I'm happy with how it looks. As for the Champions League ball, it looks equally as good, but also distinctly different. As you can see, they're still running with a very colorful base to the ball, as we've seen over the last 2 years, with the white aspect actually being the big star design, where I know a lot of people are annoyed that the star tips do not touch anymore. They kind of overlap a little bit. Doesn't bother me quite as much, and I like the fact that the stars are a little bit bigger because of this design choice. Now, of course, this is for the final, which will be played in Istanbul. They're also going to be using this during the knockout stages of the tournament. You, of course, have the trophy right there and the Istanbul 20 final logo right underneath it, which does look quite good. As far as what's going on with this design, you have some pink, you have some blue, you have some green, you have some purple, you have some teal. There's a bunch of different colors, and this is supposed to be a hand-painted map of Istanbul, as well as some kind of, I guess, landmarks and just little kind of Easter eggs about the city that are kind of incorporated into this design. I couldn't pick out any specific details for you because I've never actually been there, but I'm sure a lot of you guys will notice certain things. Now, of course, all official match balls have to be FIFA approved. However, FIFA does not seem to be very strict on what is and isn't allowed in terms of different designs and technologies, which gives brands like Nike and Adi a lot of freedom to pretty much do whatever they want, and also how you end up with products like the Adidas Jabalani, which I think goes down in history as one of the weirdest and craziest footballs of all time. Either way, you have two products that share a lot of similarities, but are also different in regards to the technologies that they incorporate. But I think to keep things nice and simple, let's talk about what is exactly the same, or at least very similar. Similarity number one has to do with the panels, and that these are both made out of plastic or some form of synthetic, whatever you want to categorize it as. Now, that's not to say that they feel identical in that regard, because I'm sure they're using different compounds. The main takeaway here is that the Champions League ball seems to have a slightly firmer feel to the casing and is also a little bit more slippery, where the Merlin, for whatever reason, still has a firmness to it, but seems to compress ever so slightly more and has a slightly rubbery feel to it. So the amount of grip between your foot and the ball seems to be a little bit more aggressive with the Merlin versus the slightly more slick sensation of the Champions League ball. Both of these balls also feature some form of a micro texturing. On the Champions League ball, you can very clearly see it is a checkered pattern, but what's also kind of unique about the Champions League ball is that the finish across the surface of the panels actually varies depending on the panel. You can pretty clearly see that the white stars have a glossy finish, where the colored panels in between the stars have a matte finish, which I think does allow for, again, a slightly more slippery, or I would say more inconsistent feel versus what you'll find from the Merlin, which has smooth panels with this very kind of subtle micro texturing on the surface that actually has different patterns to it. You can see that some of them are perfect circles. All of this kind of zigzag graphic is pretty heavily textured as well. And then you can see you also have this kind of weird pattern in some of the orange spots. It's very difficult to say exactly what's going on here. There's consistent texturing across the entire ball. I would say that the texture itself also feels a little bit more significant versus the Champions League ball. But again, the takeaway here is that this just feels slightly more grippy than what Adi have done. And then the final similarity between these two is that they both feature fused panels, meaning that there is no stitching. The panels themselves are simply kind of glued or fused together. Now, I would say that what Adi has done on the Champions League ball here is the more traditional variation of a fused panel construction, and that you can very clearly see the panels and how they're fused together. And you can see that there is some depth to basically the gaps in between the panels where they're actually fused, where on the Merlin, Nike kind of has their own proprietary thing going, where I'm sure there's some kind of a special process that makes this very different from everybody else. But you can see the fuse on the panels themselves is very, very minimal, and that there isn't much depth to it. It's almost perfectly flush. And of course, the panel design on the Merlin is distinctly different. It's basically this shape that you have outlined right here, but just significantly larger. You can kind of follow the line for yourself to see that. But then of course on the Nike ball, which again is something unique to them, are these extra little grooves or indentations that you find throughout the ball. From a distance, it looks like it's made up of a bunch of mini panels, but that's not actually the case. It's these large panels with what they call aero track grooves kind of filling in the larger panels. Supposedly, all of these grooves allow for more even airflow across the ball, which makes it fly through the air more consistently, more quickly, blah, 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 blah. The one complaint that I have seen in regards to this fusion and design process is that you do end up with kind of these little bit almost cornered edges on some of the fuse points, where a lot of people I've seen complain about the Ortums not being perfectly round. And I think when you have these two side by side, the Champions League ball does seem to be more perfectly round. You have these almost, I want to say, edges on the Ortum. It's not something that you at all notice while you're playing, but for people that are kind of perfection seekers, I could see why that might bother them, but I wouldn't necessarily view that as an issue. And of course, let's not forget, the Merlin does have ACC technology, which basically means that this ball has a feature that you wouldn't even know is a feature unless they physically wrote ACC on the ball. To make a long story short, if it's wet, the ball is slippery, regardless of whether or not it has ACC. From a build quality perspective, I'd say that these two are pretty even, and I can say that about most official match balls. That's something that gets really overlooked because of how expensive they are. These might be expensive, but they last a very long time should you take care of them and use them in proper playing conditions. I have some official match balls from 2008 that I still regularly use, and they're still pretty much in perfect condition, aside from obviously having a lot of scuffs. So as long as you take care of these balls, they should last you, I don't want to say forever, but very close to it. The one thing that I will say about official match balls that is also very misunderstood is how they hold their air. A cheap $20 or $30 ball, you put air in it and it holds its air for like 3 months until you need to use a pump again. And that's simply because it's just using cheaper materials, mainly a cheaper bladder material, which high-end balls have a much softer natural rubber, which doesn't hold its air quite as long, but allows for a much better feel when striking the ball. So it's very normal for an official match ball to lose a decent amount of air after 24, especially 48 hours. So if you're going to carry a match ball ball around in your bag as your only ball, I would also accompany it with a pump because you're probably going to need to put air in it every single time that you use it. For me, what makes a great match ball is its overall consistency. If I kick it straight, is the ball going to go straight? So unless you have something that is hugely flawed like a Jabulani, you're not really going to see a performance difference from one ball to the next. So really what you have to take into consideration when picking between two balls like this is the way that they feel, which I'll do my best to describe that for you. I think that between these two balls, they are arguably two of the best match balls on the market. So I'll say this right off the bat, I don't think you can go wrong with either of them. In terms of specific characteristics, the Champions League ball definitely feels a little bit lighter versus the Ortem, which has a slightly heavier, kind of more weighted feel. The Ortem actually compares more closely to something like the Uniforia or the Telstar from the Adidas brand, which obviously features a completely different panel design from the Champions League ball, which ultimately does impact the way that the ball feels against your foot, especially when shooting. In terms of curling the ball, I really feel, for whatever reason, and maybe this is down to the fact that the ball just feels a little bit lighter, the Champions League ball curls really well, or at least seemingly a little bit easier versus the Ortem as well as other match balls. But in terms of just pure speed, I feel like the Ortem passes through the air not only more consistently, but also a little bit more quickly. Again, these are very small margins, and unless you've spent a significant amount of time with either of these two balls, you're not really going to notice a huge difference. Again, I think the main feel difference between these two is that the Merlin feels a little bit heavier and the Champions League ball feels a little bit lighter and maybe a little bit firmer to the strike. If you ask me to pick between these two right now, based on performance and personal preference having used both of these balls, I do prefer the feel of the Merlin based on it having a slightly more weighted sensation, and I would say it just feels more dense and heavy when you strike through it versus a slightly kind of pingier, lighter feel that you get from the Champions League ball. But again, I think that these are two of the best match balls that you can buy right now. I'd be happy to use either of them. If I were picking based on looks, as cool as I think this Merlin is, I just love the design of the Champions League ball, especially in this color. It's pink, which is not normally my first choice, but the star-shaped panels are just iconic, and I just think it's a very, very cool looking ball. So if you're picking them just based on looks, I don't think you can go wrong either way. But again, it really comes down to personal preference. There's no bad choice here. Anyways, guys, that's it for my comparison. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to support it with a like. Again, if you're interested in either of these two match balls or the takedown variations for yourself, links to the review pages can be found down below in the description, where you will find buy it now links with exclusive SR4U coupon codes to pick these up below their normal retail prices. If you have any questions, as always, leave them down below in the comment section. I'll do my best to get an answer out to you as soon as I possibly can. If you're not subscribed already, make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you get notified when the next new video goes live. You can find all my social media information linked down below in the description as well. Other than that, guys, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.